Gladys Wanga, woman representative, Homa Bay County, Priscilla Nyokabi, former MP, and Nixon Korir, MP, Langata. That's my panel this morning. We were looking at what's happening in the political scene in Kenya. Of course, that always makes the big headlines. It's 22 days to the elections. We still are not agreeing on how we should go for this election. In fact, questions are, and everyone was asking during the break, are we going to have this election or not? We have enough legal minds. We have two lawyers on the panel, but also Gladys Wanga has been a legislator for some time. So yeah, she is a legal mind as well. What is this that we're even wondering? And this is probably the kind of common Mwananchi talk out there. Will we have elections or not? And if we don't, what does that mean going forward? I've seen even one headline, someone has actually gone to court to try and compel the NASA presidential candidate, to have IEBC compel NASA presidential candidate Raila Odinga to be part of the August or the October 26th election. What does this mean? Do we have a proper understanding of our laws? Yes, let's start.
You know, this is the sort of always interesting intersection between law and politics. By law, we are going into the election. All sort of legal provisions put together, the Supreme Court decision, the IEBC, the new laws that are going to come. I think by all indicators of law, we should go to the election on the 26th. And that is why the former Prime Minister, the NASA side, I think that they need to confirm that they are going into this election, because that's the political bit of it. By law, we are going into the election on the 26th. And it is in all constituencies in the whole of Kenya. There will be an election everywhere. And I think for those of us, especially who are supporting President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, our question has become turnout, that we really must turn out, because people are getting tired of all these conversations. The country wants to move forward, so we prepare to turn out on the 26th. We prepare to vote for our presidential candidate, but then the same also applies to NASA, that they have to confirm to this country by politics that they will be going into this election. But that's
political, because automatically Raila Odinga is a candidate in this election. We're not going for any nomination process. The two candidates are already in that election. That's Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta and Raila Amolo Odinga. He is a candidate. You've already been talking about boycotting the election. What does that mean? For your candidate to pull out of this election, he has to write to do so in writing to the IEBC. When you talk about boycotting the election, is that what you mean?
Well,
if at all these things don't go your way.
We have not spoken about boycotting the elections. What we have said is there will be no election as per the ruling of the Supreme Court, which is that the elections will have to be conducted as per the Constitution, or in conformity with the Constitution and our election laws. We are prepared for an election, don't get me wrong. We already went into an election on 8th of August. We won that election.
When you say there will be no election,
there will be no election.
What do you mean? There
will be no election. If this is why we are saying no reforms, no election. We are not talking about boycotting the election, because for an election to happen, it has to be in conformity with the Constitution and our election laws. And what we are saying is, if certain things are not done, then we don't see how Kenya can go into an election in conformity with the Constitution.
How do you intend to stop this process? Or are you saying that even if we go and vote, that it will not count? Is that what you're saying? Or you're saying
it may not count? And we are not putting all, we have said this, including our principles. We have said this, and we have said it consistently, that in the event that we are not convinced that these elections are going to be conducted in conformity with the Constitution and the election laws, then the elections will not be there.
Yet some of these laws, once passed, they become law. Well, some of these amendments, once passed, they become law. When you say if it's not in conformity with the law, that will be the law as well. That is part of your problem with this particular election.
If Jubilee bulldoze that law, we will of course be challenging that law in court. I'm sure even any Kenyan will be challenging it in court. Fred, you know, for a long time we have pretended that this country is okay, that people can just, you know, move and do whatever they want. But this country is for all Kenyans. And this is why we are saying, let us agree on the playing field. Once we are agreed that the playing field is level, let us go to an election. Nobody doesn't want to go to an election. NASA went to we campaigned, and we went to an election on the 8th of August. Even if the elections were held 10 days later. You know that people have made up their minds in this country about who they are voting for in this election. I mean, people voted for NASA, and the people who voted for NASA would do so again. So there's really nothing in terms of saying whether you're prepared or not. What we are saying is the playing field must be level. We have put out what we think, in our view, will make the playing field level for us to go into this election. It is called the irreducible minimums.
And
it is out there.
If at all IBC does not comply with the irreducible minimum, there will be no election.
There will be no election. And
let me say,
we will not boycott the election, and there will be no election. And you know, there is a point that we were talking about even a bit earlier about somebody going to court to compel Raila to be on the ballot. Of course, they will be unable, in my view, thinking that they would. How would you compel someone to be on the ballot? But you know, that is that is anticipatory. That is anticipatory of the fact that the election we are going into is based, and what IEBC based their election preparations on was on the Supreme Court ruling of 2013. That is why we did not have a fresh nomination process. And because we did not have a fresh nomination process, you know, there are two candidates. Yes. So if one candidate is not on the election, there will be a question as to whether there is an election.
But he's already on the ballot. That's the question. Raila Odinga is already on the ballot, and I'm sure if the printing is going on, it will be Raila Odinga, Uhuru Kenyatta on the ballot paper. That is automatic.
Maybe Honorable
what if he's not on the ballot? Will that be an election?
But allow us also to challenge them on the position that there is no law that is going to support this no election.
Let me say, maybe Honorable Wanga has forgotten that Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga have been gazetted as candidates, and they were gazetted, and the date for election was gazetted. Let me say this: all the institutions that are necessary to have an election on 26th are there. We have all the institutions, and we are ready for an election. What Mheshimiwa Nyakabia said is true. In terms of law and all the institutions that are set for an election, they are there. The ballot papers will be printed with Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta in the ballot, unless Raila Odinga himself puts it in writing to IBC that is not going to be in the ballot. That is the only way you can pull him out of the election. Otherwise, we have an election on 26th, and I want to say this: we have a situation here where one of the players want to decide which side of the field he will be without balloting. One of the players want to decide the referee. One of the players want to decide the linesman. One of the players want even the goalpost in their side to be reduced. And we have what they call free and fair playing ground. What we are saying is that the only way you will determine that the constitution was not followed if you go back is if you have an election and go back to court. And that is when the court will say that the constitution, as per the ruling of the Supreme Court, was not complied with. Otherwise, you cannot sit here and say that it has not been followed.
As a lawyer, do you see any possibility, because they're saying there will be no election? I'm trying to look for a definition of that no election.
I don't understand.
Because the ballot papers will have been printed. The process is going on. Even if you say publicly, I'm not part of that, unless you do so in writing, you will still be part of that election. People will still go and vote. Do you understand what they could be meaning by saying there will be no election?
I don't understand what they mean, but I understand it to mean they are not ready.
I think they are doing politics. I think it's more political pronouncement as opposed to anything that has substantial implications in law.
The election
because what would happen is this: the Supreme Court has ordered there be an election in 60 days. The 60 days run out on October 31st. So between now and October 31st, we must have an election for this country, not for NASA, not for Jubilee, for Kenya. The Supreme Court guides everybody in Kenya. So this position of no election, I think, is more the political discussion of being relevant and making news, and they have to meet in a boardroom and unpack what the no election means. But for the purposes of this country, for the purposes of a conclusion for all of us, I think that on the 26th we will have an election. The candidates are true. Luckily, the amendments also cover a bit of the fresh nomination, because that is an area that needs a little bit of clarity in terms of the two candidates. What happens if one of them doesn't go into the election? I think there's a process there that they would have to write and say that I don't want to be part of this election. Then that way the country can know that you're not part of the election. But if you just say it politically that I'm not in the election and you're not taking the legal steps, I think that's going to
still be an election.
I think for as long as there might be the view that this is political talk, but as the days go by, we will realize that there will be no election in this country if we do not sit down and level the playing field, and if we do not look at the issues that resulted in that election.
You sound very resolute when you say there will be no election.
And we are very resolute. But you will see.
Is it that you're not willing to tell us how we will have no election?
You are going to be seeing.
But allow us to also say here and now
in the coming days.
That we hope the now does not include violence.
Yes.
We hope the now is talk.
We are very
now must not include violence.
Ladies and gentlemen, our time is up.
No. We will work within the law. At least the basic minimum, no violence.
We will work within the law and the Constitution.
Your final submissions, even as we wrap up our news review.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that as a country, we need to move forward. We want to have an election which is free and fair on 26th, and we want the will of the people, the supreme will of the people, to be respected. And that is what we are saying as Jubilee. We are willing to go to move any step, including even sitting with NASA, to ensure that we have a process that is free and fair on 26th, that is acceptable to that is respecting the will of the people without conditions.
Thank you so much.
I think the same message as well, that we are prepared for this election on the 26th, and that the country goes into the election, that it remains peaceful. I think there's this debate about secession, I think is a bad debate. We love each other, the Luos, the Kikuyus, the Kalenjins, the Meru, everybody, Taita. We were given this country by the Lord. We all protect it, we go to the election, and then the president can start to worry about legacy, nation building. How do we include everybody, including even the questions around change of the constitution to allow a little bit more space for some of the inclusion debate that has been going on, but not before we respect what the institutions have said, like what the Supreme Court has said and what Parliament is now going to say. But once we do that, I think that Kenya is going to be safer.
Okay. Finally, Gladys Wanga.
Yeah, what I'd like to say is that as NASA, we are prepared and ready to go for an election, but it is not just an election. It must be a free, fair, accountable and verifiable election. We are going into this election not under normal circumstances. We are going into this election following a nullified election, citing where the Supreme Court cited irregularities and illegalities. What we are saying as NASA is going into this election without these issues and the institution of IEBC sorting out the issues that were raised within the Supreme Court convincingly would mean just walking into a den of lions to be eaten in there. It's like a cook has put poison in your food and you're asking the same cook to cook for you another bunch of ugali and you want to eat it happily. This is what we are not going to do. And this is why we are saying, and our rallying call is no reforms, no elections.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gladys Wanga, woman representative, Homa Bay County, Priscilla Nyokabi, former member of the National Assembly, and Nixon Korir, MP, Langata constituency, my news review panel this morning. Remember, Power Breakfast still continues, and that's the hashtag to use up until 9 a.m. Joey Mudengi will be moderating the Man Cave discussion today with Roy Karuhize, Sheila Kwamboka, and Pastor Paul Kuria. Just before that, she'll have another interview on health matters.